and welcome to the virtual tour of Intentional Community. My name is Ryan, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at the Foundation for Intentional Community. I'm filling in for Cynthia, who is away on vacation this month. I'm excited to introduce you to two wonderful communities. They are Kibbutz Mishol in Israel and MakerHouse in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. First up, we'll hear from Anton in Kibbutz Mishol. Over to you, Anton.
Our small groups meet together once a week for learning, for making decisions. Also, we'll have evening meals together, and they will happen in the communal space at the end of each hallway. So that's our kibbutz inside of this building. But the reason why we live together, and the reason why we choose this intensive communal lifestyle is not just a lifestyle choice for ourselves as members of the kibbutz, but it's about impacting, it's about being a base, a platform for us impacting the surroundings and having an impact on the wider society. And I'll say a few things about that in a minute, about what we do day to day. Another question that's often asked is about membership, is about joining our community. Something interesting about our community is we don't have any sort of rule book whatsoever. We have no constitution, we have no do's and don'ts, we have agreements between us. We make decisions by consensus. I guess we have lots and lots of different forums within the community where decisions are made. Specifically, the living groups is a very central place where decisions are made, but there are also mixed groups between the living groups, and there are the work teams as well that make decisions also, from how we bring up our kids together as a community to how we divide our spaces up in the building. Our building, we have offices, we have spaces for different age groups of kids, we have our living spaces, living apartments. We have a wood workshop and a music room and other spaces like that. So when I talk about the membership process, we don't have a rule book, but anyone that joins our community, we create a process based on what's good for the community at the time and for the person at the time. Involves coming for a meal to one of the living groups, includes maybe coming for a weekend, maybe involves coming to work with us for some time. And gradually the process of joining the kibbutz is something very organic and part of a conversational process of understanding that it's right for us and it's right for them. On the other hand, we're not looking to grow as a kibbutz per se. We're 150 people in this one building. The building is full. But what we are doing is growing by creating and establishing other kibbutzim around the country. We are currently part of a network of 5 similar kibbutzim around the country, and we're all the time guiding and helping the younger members of the younger kibbutzim to grow and to develop and to create their model of urban kibbutz. We, as I say, our gatherings together, everyone together as a kibbutz, generally happens during festivals, whether it's the Jewish holidays that we celebrate together as a Jewish community. We also get together for life cycle events. Those happen outside because, again, we don't have space inside. The climate here allows us to do a lot of that outside for most of the year. So we've had weddings and birth events and bar bat mitzvah events. And as I say, the weekly and meetings that happen during the week happen in smaller groups, in mixed groups, or in living groups. And I want to move on to say something about the things that we do, because again, we could be living in this building happily as a full income sharing commune, but at the end of the day, you know, we're not one of those communities that are running off into the hills and being off the grid, and as far as I see it, being disconnected from where the real work needs to be done. And that's in the inner cities, that's in the towns and the cities. We're living in the periphery of Israel, up in the north, in one of the poorest towns, in one of the poorest neighborhoods, in one of the poorest towns. And we specifically have chosen to be here in a disadvantaged neighborhood in order to build partnerships with our surroundings. Another name for our kibbutz is an educators kibbutz, because most of us are involved in one way or another in education. It's what we believe is a method in which to affect society for the better. And the projects we run start from a kindergarten in our neighborhood, a public kindergarten, which is open to both the kids of the kibbutz and all the kids of the neighborhood. We run an elementary school where a member of the kibbutz is the principal, and around about half of the staff of the school, the public school, are from the kibbutz. I can maybe show you some pictures. This is one of our celebrations, one of our Jewish holidays. Here we're outside as a kibbutz celebrating. We've got, what was I going to show you? I was going to show you the school. In the school that we run, the elementary school, we built an ecological educational greenhouse. Cutting edge greenhouse, nothing of this sort, certainly not in the periphery of Israel, the social periphery, the economic periphery. We've got kids from very difficult backgrounds, and we run experiential education rather than the kids spending all day, every day sitting at desks with a teacher standing up in front of them trying to fill them with knowledge. This is very hands-on, literally getting your hands dirty. That's my 7-year-old daughter on the left there, getting her hands dirty in the ecological greenhouse that we have in our school. There's another shot of them working in the greenhouse. There's like a woodwork section of the greenhouse where they can work with wood and build things. Here they're working with mud. They also obviously grow things, experiments. They do their science here as well. So that's in the school that we run, and here there's other experiments that they do with growing in pipes. Another thing that we do that we're very involved with as a kibbutz is we work with refugees. We've recently been working with refugees that have been fleeing the conflict, the war in Ukraine. We've had quite a few thousand refugees coming to Israel, and we've been running activities in 3 different locations around Israel, basically using our skills as educators in non-formal education by working with kids that have come. We also set up a refugee center for kids in Poland, in Lublin, the nearest city over the border from Ukraine, where many refugees fled. This is a guy from the kibbutz working with 4 Ukrainian refugees that had come to the center that we set up there. Before that, for many years, been working with refugees from Africa, from South Sudan, and from Eritrea. Again, both here in Israel, in the city and around the country, but also in Africa. We send members of the kibbutz here have been over several years to work with those people that have been displaced from conflict. Another project that we do that might be of interest to people is the community of Palestinian, Arab, and Jewish Israeli activists in this city. We set up 4 years ago a community of people, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, that come together regularly. I'm on the steering committee. We meet every 2.5, 3 weeks, and we run events in the city, from picnics in local parks to hikes at the weekend. We celebrate festivals together. This is a meal breaking the Ramadan fast that we did together, and we've celebrated Christmas, and we've celebrated Hanukkah, and we've celebrated different festivals together. We're also very politically active. We've got a community garden that we set up also as a joint program of this community, the Bustan community. So that's something also that we're involved in, very close to our hearts. How are we doing for time?
You're doing good.
I'm doing good. Are there questions? Can I see if there are questions?
You answered the question live that was in the Q&A already.
Oh, wow, without even seeing it.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'll say something about some of those and some of the projects that we run as our day-to-day. They're not volunteering. They are our work. we're able to dedicate ourselves to working in education in the society because we're able to pool our resources, and all of the funding that goes to the projects that we run come through either the Ministry of Education or the local municipality, or both. So we run after school programs also in the neighborhood for kids after school, a safe space off the streets where they can get help with their homework, they can get help socially. You know, it's not unheard of for kids, even kids in this neighborhood, when they get into conflict, to pull knives on each other. And our centers are a safe place for those kids to come with trained counselors from the kibbutz, working with these kids. Most often they're getting their only hot meal of the day in our center, in our after school center. We also run a youth movement, which is a national youth movement all over the country. Another youth center where kids can come. We run seminars about society and about politics. And we are active, extremely active, to try and impact the spaces around us. We're very involved right now. There's currently yesterday, there's a big teachers' strike in Israel. And obviously it's a topic very close to our hearts as educators. We have not only informal educators in this kibbutz, but also teachers that work in schools, our own school and other schools. And that's something that we're very involved in. We've been very involved in over the years in strengthening the public health system, fighting and trying to stop the creeping privatization that's going on in what is still a public health system here in Israel. So if you get a feel of what we're about taking responsibility for the society and the solidarity that is sorely being eroded by successive governments that are trying to, I guess, divide us, and the model of kibbutz, of us living together and trying to create a different environment, I guess, is for us is an effort and an example of how a wider society can potentially be run on a different set of values.
Awesome. I do have a couple of questions in the Q&A. Wasaka asks, how does your community's finance and economics work? Where does capital come from for projects and your property? How do members make money, or do they?
Okay, so there's a separation. The projects are basically run through our nonprofit organization. Our nonprofit organization does also grant writing, and there's private fundraising, philanthropy. But on the whole, most of our funding for our projects comes from either the Ministry of Education or the municipality. And those are our projects and our NGO. Our community, we don't receive money from anywhere apart from for the work that we do. So for those of us that work, which is the vast majority of us that work in our educational projects, in the budget line for those projects that we present the proposal to the municipality or the Ministry of Education is a line for wages. And so those wages, for example, the teachers that work in our school or the youth workers that work in the streets here at night, helping youth, they draw a wage, and that wage comes into the one kibbutz bank account. There are several people, there are a few people that don't work in our educational projects. We have a few social workers that work in the, for the education, for the health, in the health ministry. We have people, we have our own computer programming business also as a kibbutz, and that brings in money, and all the money that anyone brings in goes into one bank account. And then each living group gets a monthly payment from the kibbutz according to the number of adults and number of kids. But that monthly amount that comes into each living group is really minimal, because most of our expenditure comes directly out of the kibbutz bank account. So our health, our education, our transport, all of those things come down, rent, all of those things are bills, all of those things come directly out of the kibbutz account. So what Agent Living Groups gets is basically enough for our groceries and a little for entertainment and clothing, and that's basically it.
Awesome. Thank you for that run through. We'll take one more question and then I'll invite you to go into the Q&A afterwards. Quick update, we might have gotten the third panelist to come a little bit later. Somebody wants to know, do you have seniors living in your community?
Seniors, our eldest is 51 years old. Our youngest is about 2.5 weeks old. Our oldest child is just turned, is like 18.5 is our oldest child. So that's the span.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing about your community, Anton.
No problem.
Awesome. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Todd, who's going to share about MakerHouse.
All right, so I'm Todd Maedemann from MakerHouse. So MakerHouse is a community of makers based here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So first, a little background about who I am. I'm trained as a software engineer. I have always been a hobbyist maker and have gradually found my way into product management and the environmental movement. So it's kind of a life defined by many transformations and being a lifelong learner. And currently a product manager at Tesla, but I'm always looking for opportunities to combine my passions, in this case for product management and the environment. But how MakerHouse came about is that I had a lifelong dream of building my own house. And I've always loved making things. I've always wanted to build a house, passionate about the environment. So it kind of made sense to create this eco-friendly community house for makers. And so the origin here is, rewind 10-15 years. I meet my best friend in college over shared interests in maker projects. And we lived together for 10 years, gradually escalating our idea of what this meant. So, it started in a dorm room, turned into an apartment where we had a full workshop just in an apartment. Then we got a standalone house with a larger workshop. And finally, we built MakerHouse from scratch to really enable awesome makery projects. So the bottom screenshot, or the bottom picture here is our current workshop. And so, what is MakerHouse? It's obviously a community house. It has 5 bedrooms, and it was built from the ground up for shared living. So lessons learned from this past 10 years of experimentation. We have a massive kitchen. It's incredibly well soundproofed. There's lots of shared spaces, theater, workshop, yard. And why a community house at all? Why not just build a workshop for myself? I think that community is hugely important to combat the loneliness of the modern world and to create happiness and learning environments. We're constantly teaching each other and learning from each other. And we also try to give that knowledge back to the community. So we host open workshops every week. We have a free library out in front of the house, and we're just constantly looking for ways to leverage our interest in making things to benefit the local community. It's for creative folks. So really the centerpiece of the house is the huge workshops, singular. Members are encouraged to modify and upgrade everything. So everyone kind of brings their own interest. We had some members for into music, so they expanded the theater to also be a music studio. Some folks got really into coffee, so now there's a whole automated coffee setup, and really just enabling infectious creativity. So beyond the community itself, one of our members, significant others, created branding for the house just because they were a graphic designer and they wanted to give back. And we operate on the principle of duocracy, which, if you're not familiar with it, is basically just everyone is empowered to do anything, so long as it's reversible and reasonable. And then if they want to do something like knock a wall down, okay, perhaps talk to other folks first, but just a very, an environment trying to make it very enabling. And finally, it's also very mindful of our impact. As I mentioned, I care deeply about the environment. And so I did a lot of research into building this house about how to make it as low impact as possible. So the house is solar panel powered. The whole roof is covered in solar powers. I think about 80% of our electricity comes from the sun, and the house is all electric. So there's no natural gas line, which, besides reducing carbon emissions, is also great for safety and health. You aren't breathing in gas fumes. We also share an electric vehicle, pretty cool little car share program. So we only have 2 cars for 6 adults, which is less than a third of the US average. And I also just fundamentally, when designing this house at the beginning, wanted to pick a highly walkable location. So you can access pretty much any amenity you need, doctors, grocery stores, significant bus lines, etc., by walking or biking from the house. There we go. So we have a little video that we just made to tour the house. So we'll go ahead and play that. Yeah, so that's the house. As you might have seen in the video, very large, open, shared spaces, kind of following the Frank Lloyd Wright idea of having the community spaces be the default, and then if people want to choose to have some quiet time, they can go up to their rooms, and lots of house modifications and creativity in the workshop. We just added a weightlifting setup, since many of our members are getting into weightlifting as a form of fitness. So constantly evolving, constantly changing. And so the process to join MakerHouse is quite straightforward. You can apply at the website, mkr.house. There's a little short form just to get to know you. Because it's maker-centric, you do get bonus points for having past experience as a maker, but it's not required. All that we look for at minimum is just a desire to learn, an interest in learning. Many of our members today started with no makery experience and have since learned how to use most of the tools in the shop, and have contributed lots of cool projects to the house. So once you apply, then we set up a little chat with the house community, just for folks to get to know each other, make sure folks get along. And really that's it. If everyone gets along and feels like it's a good fit, then you're in. As noted, we do have a minimum stay of 6 months, just so that people have a chance to truly get to know each other. The rooms are about $1,000 a month, and our next opening starts January 1st. And as a final note, we also try to give back to the community. So we open source a lot of what we do at the house. We have a bunch of software that we've published for communities, how to manage like a shared network with a lot of folks, how to do like a shared chore list to keep the house in good condition. We also have an open source code of conduct. And I also published a lot of articles about the process of building the house itself for anyone interested in new construction.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm so curious, in a typical month, like what sort of projects would a typical member be working on in the MakerHouse?
Yeah, so it's really about what the member is passionate about. We have one member, he and his fiance are making their own engagement rings, and they're casting it out of platinum, which little did I know is extremely difficult to cast out of. And so for the past 6 months, they've been building new devices and tools to be able to cast out of such a delicate metal. We have another member who's very into cosplay and conventions, and so they're constantly making costumes. I myself am mostly a woodworker, so I'm constantly building little furniture and shelves and that sort of thing.
Kate asked in the chat, how is food dealt with? Who pays for food?
Yeah, so we tend to operate on a fairly individual model. Everyone has spaces, so there's you have space in the refrigerator, space in the pantry, but you generally provide your own food. We do sometimes do like house dinners, so someone will be like, hey, I'm going to cook a big lasagna, who wants in on it?
Crystal asks, do you think it would be possible or financially feasible to have shared solar grid that supports multiple households? How difficult do you think would be encountered, and how could they be overcome? Are there better alternatives? Yeah,
so it would be very difficult to set up a literal shared grid where you're actually running like electrical wires between the houses. Installing solar on an individual house is very straightforward. You pay a contractor, they go and plop it on, and then it reduces your energy bills. But if you're in a living situation where where it doesn't make sense, if your roof is in the wrong orientation or it's shaded or something, there are community solar programs where you can basically buy solar panels that someone then installs like in a solar farm. So that's a pretty good kind of intermediate way to have your electricity covered by solar.
Carmen wants to know, is the house rented by all or owned by someone in the community?
Yeah, so we looked at various ways of financing this project. What we ended up doing is that I personally built and paid for the house in very typical financing instruments, got a mortgage for it, and then I rented out to the housemates. And so I try to be as financially transparent as possible. I basically share like all of the expenses that go into that, and charge the absolute minimum of rent to kind of cover the cost of the house. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing about your community.
Of course.
So Los Portales has not made it here yet. So I want to open it up to more broader questions. If folks want to put questions that we can ask to both of these communities into the Q&A now. I want to ask you both if you have any advice for future community founders or residents. If you want to just do it popcorn style, either of you can start, it doesn't matter.
Go for it, Todd.
Yeah, so advice for community founders, at least what I found worked well for me was prototyping it at a small scale. Before this house, we rented a smaller house with 4 bedrooms and kind of tested a lot of our hypotheses, like, what do you need in a space? What do you want the community to be about? How can you create a structure where folks live together? So prototyping.
I think there are both positives and negatives of either building a community from nothing or joining an existing community. I guess one of the advantages of joining an existing community is that it's there, waiting, ready to start living from the second you move in, and that it's hard to set up a new community and to grow and to develop and to build both physically and those relationships that goes into developing a viable community that's going to last over the long term. On the other hand, again, it's not something that I've experienced because I've built this community from the beginning. But I assume that, I know that building a community from nothing is a lot like bringing up a child. You go through different stages, and you put your blood, sweat, and tears into it, and a lot of love, and a lot of time, a lot of energy. And when you see that thing develop and blossom and grow and become independent and making its mark on the world, there's no greater feeling. And I think that's also true with being part of growing a community over a couple of decades now.
Awesome answer. Kate's question feels like a good follow-up question. Todd just answered it in the Q&A, but I think you should answer it as well. If you had to do it over again, what, if anything, would you do differently, Anton?
What would I do differently? I don't know. I'm not a person that dwells on mistakes. And that keeps me stewing. It's definitely something, the mistakes that I make, I try to grow from and learn from. I make mistakes all the time. We make mistakes all the time, and it's not about the mistakes themselves, it's about what you do about them. And I try and respond differently when the same things happen. I guess the easiest example of living in an intensive community is interpersonal conflict. Certainly in my younger days, when I had more hair on my head, I would be a lot more hot-headed, and I would get up and leave and slam a door. And I think over the years I have been working on being able to deal with being frustrated and being disappointed and being angry and being upset, and have more patience and try and be in that conversation. So those are the places where I think I've tried to grow, don't always succeed, and learn from that. Also, I guess there are things that we do now as a community that I accept now as a community, differences that we have, when 20 years ago I would be like, no, it needs to be this way. So I think I'm a bit more open-minded, but I don't know, if you ask other people that I live in community with and they ask me whether they think I'm open-minded, I'm not sure you'll get a resounding yes. But yeah, I think it's about growing and learning, and maybe even mellowing a bit.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I want to touch on, Todd, your answer to Kate's question. You said you would love to actually build a community that's community financed and has shared ownership. It just didn't work out logistically at this time. Do you have any thoughts or aspirations to collectively share your house in the future? Or if not, like, have you learned anything that would be helpful to other people about being the sole owner of a collective community?
Absolutely. Yeah, and to build off Anton's point a little bit, once you have a community, like, you're constantly learning and evolving from it. So that, yeah, there even if you make some mistakes at the beginning, you can continually adjust and pivot. So really, there's very few kind of mistakes that you can't undo or evolve the community to resolve. One of the core ones being kind of how it's financed and how it's structured. I think it is very what we found is that it's very perplexing to share ownership of a single family house. So MakerHouse is designed, it's 5 bedrooms, but it's like 1 kitchen, so it's all one house, and it does just become kind of mentally challenging. Like, how do you slice that up? So I think if I were to do it again and set up a community finance thing, what I would probably do is buy a plot of land and then enable individuals to build kind of tiny homes with a shared space, and that way each person can own their own home, but it's still part of this communal space. In terms of building a large house like this, the financial instruments, at least in the US, are just like not really kind of ready or available for multiple non-married people to own it. So anything that unless you just had a lot of cash, like unless every member was financially able to like put down enough cash to build it all together in cash, doing any sort of mortgage to finance it, you'd basically have to have one person or like a legally married couple finance it, get the mortgage, and then have some sort of paper agreement to share. Hence thinking about the tiny homes where each person would then be kind of able to do their own thing.
Have there been any issues that you have like found being the sole owner of your community, or like any advice like for other people that are in your shoes?
Yeah, it is a weird place to be in. I don't really want to be a landlord, and it does put you at risk of having this weird dynamic where like you have all the power because you own it, and I really try to avoid that as much as possible. Through sharing the finances, like anyone can see anytime, like how much the mortgage is costing, like kind of when the break even point for the houses, and then focusing more on like what we do together as a community. Like everyone's kind of shared responsibility for maintaining the house, but then also it's kind of a much more liberal or loose relationship than you'd normally have with a landlord in terms of what people can do to modify the house. So just creating a relationship where it's like we're all in it together. Like, I'm the one who handles the financing for it, but trying to create an atmosphere where everyone to avoid that kind of you own it and tell us what to do as much as possible.
Awesome, thanks. Just reminding folks that the Q&A is at the bottom of the screen if you have any more questions for Anton or Todd. Anton, I want to start with you. Why do you think intentional communities are important? I know that's such a broad question, but.
I think it's, for me, it's about the change that an intentional community can make vis-a-vis its surroundings. I know that if I was living on my own or living, I don't know, whatever that means, a nuclear family situation, that I might be able to volunteer for a couple of hours a week at best for a cause that I believe in. But that isn't really being involved in any sort of systematic change on a significant level. It's about giving up some of my time, and financially and time-wise being able to do that with a job that enables me to pay my bills and put food on my table is hard in today's world. And I think by living together as a community, we can create two things. One is the change that I want to see in the wider society about how we value each other, not just according to what jobs we do or to how much we earn or to what gender we are or to what our abilities are, but we value each other according to who we are and as unique individuals, and creating that community, that environment between us as a community But again, the important thing for me is also about being able to affect the surrounding society. And all the things I mentioned before, and a long, long list of other things, whether it's working with the refugees or the after-school centres, or working in an activist community of Jews and Palestinian Arabs, or whether it's whatever it is that we're involved in fighting to change the education system, the health system, all of the things that we're involved on a local level, on a national level, we're doing as our day-to-day. Like, that's what we do when we wake up until we go to sleep. And that differentiation between now is my leisure time, and now is my work time, and now is my volunteering time, and now is my family time, and now is my community time, is something that's very fluid and very holistic. And for me, when you've got so many other people involved in so many different things, it means that I'm involved in those things too. And if it happens that the computer programming company for a particular month brings in a hell of a lot more money, it means that for an extra month or for an extra year, we're able to be involved in working as teachers or working in informal education, which brings in not enough money to live on. But if we pool our resources as a community, we can continue doing those things, not just because they bring in money, but because we believe that they are things that we should be doing.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Todd, why do you think intentional communities are important?
Yeah, and hard to follow in Todd's answer. That was a very beautiful answer. At least for me, I find it important kind of from the social aspect. I think in the modern world that's very technology centric, it's very hard to have authentic connections with other people, and so it just enables you to be closer with people and not kind of be isolated into like a one-bedroom apartment where you're never seeing anyone. I find it also hugely beneficial from a learning perspective. You know, after you leave school, it's very easy to kind of lose the interest or the ability to keep learning. So being constantly around other people just kind of keeps the creative neurons flowing. And I also find it important from an impact perspective. You know, in terms of sharing resources. You know, like I mentioned, we share an electric vehicle, so we only have 2 cars for 6 adults, and we're able to. So I did an impact report on MakerHouse in terms of the carbon footprint of residents, and between the location, the car share, the solar power, and just like the shared resources, our carbon footprint per participant is about 1/10 that of the US average.
Nice. There is a new question in the Q&A from Carmen. Sounds like a follow-up for Anton. Do you think it's easier to have people commit to your vision given the tradition of kibbutz in the area?
It's a great question. I think that it's both true and not true. And what I mean by that is, yes, there is a tradition of 100 years of communal living in Israel. The kibbutz, there's 270 or so classic rural agricultural kibbutz that have been established over the last 100 years. And so when I say I live communally, when I say I live in a commune, when I say I live in a kibbutz in this country, people know what I'm talking about and don't just think, that's sort of sex and drugs and that sort of thing. So yes, there is something about it that is understood and recognized in the society. On the other hand, there's huge stigmas in society about kibbutz. And unbelievably, especially from people that live on traditional classic kibbutz, because those kibbutz communities, nearly all of them have now changed from being sharing cooperative communities where they pool their resources and they work together within the community and shape the society, Today, nearly all of those communities have moved away from that and are now basically gated communities of individual families that are pulling in wages and are owning their houses now and owning their cars and whatever. So, and they're the people that are saying, no, kibbutz can't work, kibbutz can't work. What you're doing will fall apart, just like it fell apart for us. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword in terms of Israeli society understanding and knowing maybe a little too much about what it is to live communally over the long term.
Thank you for that clarification. There's a follow-up question for Todd from Kate. Do you know of other people doing what you're doing elsewhere in the country?
Yeah, so our initial experiments were informed primarily by what we had seen in San Francisco. There's a lot of kind of large single-family homes that have been converted to kind of small community houses there. And oftentimes we saw them kind of focusing around a shared interest, be it making or music or whatnot. And so we primarily saw that in San Francisco. I haven't done extensive searching elsewhere in the country, so they may exist, but certainly not to the density that we had seen in the Bay Area.
Great, thank you. It looks like Los Portales, I don't think is going to be able to join us today. I know that Anton is also going to be leaving early, and there are no more questions in our Q&A box. I could ask more questions, but given everything, I think it would be probably in our best interest to close out a little bit earlier today. But wanted to know if there are any closing thoughts from either of you two today, if there's anything that you learned about the other community.
Yeah, I'd like to say that, you know, communities all over the world in all sorts of models. Some are more cooperative, some are less, older, newer, younger people, older people. The variety out there is infinite. And I think that there is something in common with certainly the communities that I'm familiar with, is that we're all trying to deal with loneliness, which is a product of the current rampant capitalist society in which certainly you guys there in the States and us in Israel are dealing with. It's reached epidemic proportions, the alienation that exists in our societies. And I think there's two options. We either suffer alone and fight each other, or we come together in community. And we come together and we pool our resources and we lean on each other and we support each other and we learn with each other and we love each other. And it's basically an antidote to the problems that we have today in the wider society. And I think it's amazing the variety and the different answers in different places that people are giving to this crisis. And it's rich and it's flourishing as well, I think, right now. And so if you look between the cracks, you see these things growing and blossoming, and when all around things are crumbling. And so that gives me hope as an optimist.
Well said, Anton. Thank you. Todd, any closing comments?
I would say that it's easier than you think to start a community. I don't know how many people watching this are, just looking to join a community versus are thinking about starting one. But if you're thinking about starting one, it's doable and it's definitely worth it. So I encourage you to pursue that dream.
Awesome. Thank you for that advice. Awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Sorry to cut the event short, and I'm sorry that Los Portales wasn't able to join us today. I'm so grateful that you all could be here, and I'm so grateful for Anton and Chad for sharing about your wonderful communities with us today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.